Hi there, I'm Nicky Gardner from the Writing Development Centre,
And I'm Ed Hillier from Student Wellbeing, where I work as a counsellor.
and today we're going to talk a little bit about seminar participation, particularly the different kinds of ways that we can participate in a seminar. Because me and Ed, we both know from personal experience, but also from talking to students, that it can actually be quite a difficult and often intimidating thing to do. And you might find yourself kind of walking away from a seminar feeling, a bit dissatisfied with your participation, or feeling like your contributions have been overlooked.
Mm.
So we're going to have a little chat about some of the different ways of thinking about seminar participation, and a couple of concrete strategies so that we can make it feel a bit more of a satisfying experience, I guess.
Mm.
Yeah, and I guess the big point, perhaps, at least for me, is the idea that participating effectively in a seminar isn't about winning the argument.
No.
It's not about providing the answers. It's about creating an environment in which people feel empowered to contribute in different ways. And like we said, there are different forms of participation, aren't there?
Definitely. And I think it's that thing is when you leave a seminar, you want to feel that it's been a worthwhile experience. And of course, it's not a worthwhile experience if you haven't said anything, but equally, often you can walk away feeling slightly embarrassed that you have said something, you feel it's the wrong thing. And I think a lot of what today is about is trying to get you to identify when you do participate. It's all grist to the mill. It's all important, and we're going to kind of tease out the different elements of that.
Yeah, and I think when we think about participating in a seminar, the common image that might come to mind is of someone, providing a very sophisticated and robust answer to a question, or winning an argument, or settling a debate, right? And the thing is, that's not the only way of contributing to a seminar. It's not even necessarily the best way. So we've got a little kind of graphic that I'm going to share, and all this is it's a little triangle that kind of shows that there are different types of participation. And we've done it as a triangle because I think that kind of indicates that these aren't entirely separate from each other. They do feed into each other to some degree, but they might provide us with different talking points. So you've got speculating, enabling, and challenging. And I guess, I think, if we start with speculating a bit.
Could I just
Yeah,
dive,
jump in.
dive in? Because what I was going to say, when Nicky and I developed this, we started off, I think, 6 or 7 different ways of participating. And we reduced it to 3. And the idea of it being 3 is that the people watching this video can remember what the different types are. There are 3 types. You can remember the graphic, and when you're participating in a seminar, you can think, aha, I'm on this point of the triangle, and you'll recognize why your contribution is useful.
Yeah, I think absolutely. It's just kind of an easy way of going, okay, this is what I'm doing. That's part of what we're doing. And we're not just going to say, this is how you participate effectively. It's also just recognizing things that you might already be doing, which count as effective participation, that we don't always give the space and time they deserve when we're talking about these kind of things. So that's kind of what we want to do today. So thanks for jumping in with that, Ed. I think that's a really worthwhile thing to draw out. So when we're thinking about this particular aspect here, speculating, that might be a way of just kind of reframing this conventional idea we have of answering a question, that these answers don't have to be fully formed, and they can be messy, half formed, and actually, if you do that, it can be easier for other people to come in, and it can be more inviting, can't it?
Yeah, and often speculating is the crucial part of seminar because it comes at the start. There's that kind of deadly silence when no one's saying anything, and if you can just chuck something into the mix, even if it is completely half formed, it gets other people talking. And it's often the difference between a seminar just falling flat and something becoming a useful experience, worthwhile learning experience.
Yeah, I like to think of it as a bit of like an opening bid. So it's like, okay, we're gonna throw that out there. This isn't my definitive answer, but maybe this is a good way of starting. And Ed, you're absolutely right. You can't actually have a seminar without that. And there are different ways we can do that actually. So one way of opening might be to say, well, I'm just I'm just wondering how this sounds using some kind of non-threatening phrases, right? I'm wondering how this sounds, but maybe one response might be this, and you know, we can use those phrases to indicate to the other people in the seminar that this isn't something that we've got set in stone.
Yeah, and I think the choice of language is really important, because if you phrase it in a way where you indicate that actually you are genuinely speculating, then it doesn't invite a kind of very aggressive response from anyone else in the seminar. And you're being completely open and honest and saying that I don't really know, but this occurred to me. Let's see where we get with it.
And you know, using kind of hedging phrases like might or perhaps can also help contribute to that. And you know, if I say maybe one of the main impacts of globalization is more competitive markets. So, you know, it sounds less assertive, it sounds less authoritative, but in this context, that's actually a really good thing, because we're not trying to be necessarily assertive or authoritative. We're trying to help produce that conversation. That's maybe where speculating kind of almost blends into enabling.
I think as well, I mean, Nikki, your body language there was quite interesting, because we're inevitably, when we talk about maybe and might, we kind of nod our head, and we do this quite a lot, and that indicates to everybody that, yeah, you know, we're just starting things off. It's a very, you know, it is very it's non-threatening, but it's crucial to making things work.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that, actually, because body language is really important part of this kind of non-threatening mode of communication. And you know, you may be doing seminars in person or online. When you're online, the possibilities of body language are a little bit constricted, because we're kind of limited to this profile view. And depending on the setup of your camera, your hands may not be in shot. And if that's the case, what you might want to think about is your use of voice, and particularly your use of intonation. So for the non-native speakers, this can often be a source of kind of concern. But if we have a kind of a rising intonation or a lot of tonal variation, that can be a useful way of indicating that you're not solid, you're not kind of set in stone with what you're suggesting here.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And we're talking about it, it naturally leads on to the kind of the next bit around enabling. And sort of where we view and enabling, I guess it's a role that we kind of step into. You know, I think all of these are roles that we step into and out of. They're not characteristics. And ideally, you know, best case scenario in a seminar, you would play all three roles, I think. But the important thing today is to remember that even if, you know, it's not the best case scenario in the seminar, you're recognizing that you've contributed something. And that's often where we're heading in a seminar, is some contribution.
Yeah, and I think the enabling role is, I think, quite important to me anyway, because I do feel like it's one of the less well appreciated roles, and it's really the glue that holds a seminar together. So by enabling, we might mean behaviors like providing space for other people to speak. So you might notice that someone wants to contribute, but they're finding it difficult to find a way in. It might be extending to it. Oh, Mira, you look like you wanted to say something there. You know, it's a very small thing, but that is a actually really important way of participating. You know, it could also be kind of clarifying ideas or summarizing the ideas or developing the ideas of others if you're seeing that they're kind of struggling to articulate themselves or running out of steam, which does happen to everyone.
Yeah.
Ed, you were going to say something there.
I was thinking to myself that it's also quite a good way, if you turn up to a seminar and you have one of those days where you're feeling quite anxious and you're feeling quite disconnected from the group, and you just want to kind of curl up into a ball and not be there. Enabling is a very good way of kind of sort of almost interacting in the seminar, but without saying anything initially. Because you can enable people to speak, you can give them confidence just by using body language, just by tilting your head towards them, by opening your shoulders when they're speaking, by nodding when they're saying stuff, and that will just allow you to kind of connect with people. And sometimes a bit of eye contact with somebody when they finish speaking, just, you know, an acknowledgement that they contributed something. And it's quite a nice way, if you're feeling quite anxious and not really being able to speak, it's a good way of contributing.
But that's also like a really important part, actually, because part of what a seminar's for isn't just for you to project your views and, you know, present your ideas. It's to listen to other people's. And enabling, it's forcing you to listen to other people's, really, and kind of engage with those ideas a little bit more than perhaps articulating or challenging might. You know, so it could be something like making connections, kind of going, oh, that's really interesting what you said there, Ahmed. It kind of reminds me of this article that we read last week. You know, forging those connections, that's going to force you to engage with those ideas. And these are all, like I say, really meaningful modes of participating that we don't often give enough credit. You mentioned a bit about body language there, Ed. I think again, like the speculating, a kind of open, non-threatening body language is very important in these kind of things.
Definitely. And so much of communication is actually non-verbal. It is through body language, facial expression, that sort of thing. So it's just something to be kind of aware of, that you can use, and often it's the simplest things. None of this stuff is complicated. Often it's around just opening your shoulders, picking your head up, tilting your head towards somebody, you know, which you can, most of the time you can do, even if you're feeling quite disconnected or quite disengaged.
And again, just thinking about if you are doing this online, what you may find is that you may have very good reasons for having your camera off, and there are good reasons to have your camera turned off. And in that case, we can still provide these very small affirmations that can encourage the speaker by, you know, writing a very small kind of comment in the chat. It's kind of like, absolutely, you know, something like that, or using one of the little icons like the thumbs up icon. These are just ways of kind of encouraging the speaker, and you'd be surprised at how effective they are, because one of the big differences, as you may have already experienced, is that when you are presenting online, that lack of bodily feedback can be a bit disconcerting. So those are some small ways that we can continue to provide that in an online environment where you may not have your camera on for whatever reason. And I think that takes us on to this third type of seminar participation, which is challenging, and it can be one of the more difficult parts of a seminar experience, both for those doing the challenging and for those being challenged. But it can also be a really helpful way of refining ideas and identifying potential blind spots. But it can be quite a fraught experience, can't it?
It can. I mean, I think right at the start of this recording, I very gently challenged you, because we were talking about the difference between speculating and you're moving on to enabling. I said, oh, can we just add something else there? And of course, that was a challenge. That was a challenge to the way that this particular thing was running. And I think sometimes we think of challenging as being that very kind of House of Commons aggressive point making, and of course it's not. It's just deviating the direction of a conversation, so it just goes in a slightly different direction. You know, it doesn't have to be an aggressive challenge. It can be assertive without being aggressive.
Yeah, and I think one of the ways in which we can help everyone kind of see that it's a deviation, it's not aggressive, is just by, again, it's about our use of language and being kind of careful how we're phrasing things. So, you know, if I'm kind of challenging someone's idea, I won't say, well, your idea isn't very good. So, well, that idea might need some extra work, making sure that we're kind of pinpointing the idea itself rather than the individual expressing the idea. It sounds very small, but it can make all the difference to how that dynamic ends up playing out, really.
Yeah, I think the crucial thing to take away around challenging is to always talk about, or never talk about the person, always talk about what's being discussed. So, because as soon as somebody challenges you personally, however experienced you are, you feel kind of affronted, and it puts you on the defensive. And what you're trying to do when you're challenging is to move the debate on. You're trying to avoid getting sucked into that game of it becoming a kind of personal attack. What we're after is collaborative challenge, because you're all in this together, and if you challenge in a collaborative way, you're all going to get something out of it. And I think when you're thinking about that, it's absolutely fine. In fact, I sort of encourage you to acknowledge your gaps in knowledge, acknowledge your gaps in your knowledge. You know, I mean, no one is ever suggesting that you should know everything, so it's absolutely fine to acknowledge what you don't know. And I think that means that you're then being quite open about things, and you're kind of taking that aggression out of the whole situation while still making a very valid point.
Yeah, and I think what we're doing there is we're just positioning ourselves alongside the person making the point. That we are, you know, collaborating in trying to make this point better or address a possible blind spot. And again, by acknowledging your own blind spots, that can be a really useful way of doing that. Or, maybe even offering a possible suggestion that goes, well, maybe we could think about it this way instead. And again, we might say that's where the challenging is kind of linking back to speculating. And like we said before, all these kind of types of behavior, they are all linked in certain ways.
And I think so. Just a kind of final point of the challenging, that sometimes somebody will say something in a seminar and it really gets you, and it's either quite infuriating or it's quite threatening. And I think a good way, when you recognise that in yourself, is to kind of just ask for clarification from the person before you launch into a challenge, so you know exactly what it is that you're challenging. And as Nikki was saying, all these things are linked. Enabling, speculating, and challenging, they all actually work together.
And I think it's worth just kind of bringing this to an end by reinforcing a point that you made earlier, which is that these are kind of 3 types of seminar participation, and that these are behaviors, they're not types of people. Often we find ourselves naturally gravitating towards one of these types of behaviors, maybe because we feel it's out of habit or we feel more comfortable in that space. But there aren't enablers and challengers and speculators. We all have these possibilities within us. And I think, like you said, Ed, the most productive approach to this is to pick and choose when we want to kind of move into one mode and move into another, and we can adopt these different kind of these kinds of behaviors at different points, either in our course or in the same seminar.
And I think when you've done your seminar and you're walking away from it and you're thinking about it and you're thinking about your own contribution, I think it's very important to recognise where you have contributed, even if that's been non-verbal, however it's been, to recognise that, and to, and I guess to praise yourself for it. Otherwise you tend to walk away and feel that it hasn't been worthwhile, and often it has been worthwhile, but it's just a question of you actually recognising that.